Good evening and welcome to the September 13, 2021 work session of the Mayor and City Council. Tonight we have one topic for discussion, which is establishing a Gaithersburg MCPS utilization premium payment fee as part of our adequate public facilities ordinance. But before we get to that, we do need to hold a closed executive session immediately after this meeting, and we need a motion. And I'm going to call on Council Vice President Sesma to read the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the Mayor and City Council of the City of Gaithersburg conduct a closed executive session virtually by teleconference online on Monday, September 13th, 2021. Pursuant to the general provisions article of the Annotated Code of Maryland, section 3-305B7, to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice, and 8, consult with staff, consultants, or other individuals about pending or potential litigation. The topic is to receive an update on the transfer of land and development of 315 East Avenue.
Mike, you were breaking up there. Can you just repeat that sentence that starts with the 315 East Diamond?
Okay.
All right.
Diamond Avenue. Get it?
All right.
You may want to
Mike,
try to reconnect, Judge.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have you.
Yeah, all right.
We're gonna have to reconnect you.
All
Council
right,
members,
I'm going to do that.
Council members, does anybody have, Doris sent a copy of the motion this morning. Can anybody, Rob Wu, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I move that the Mayor and City Council of the City of Gaithersburg conduct a closed executive session virtually by teleconference online on Monday, September 13th, 2021, pursuant to the general provisions article of the Annotated Code of Maryland, section 3-305B7, consult with counsel to obtain legal advice, and 8, consult with staff, consultants, and other individuals about pending or potential litigation. The topic is to receive an update on the transfer of land and development of 315 East Diamond Avenue.
Okay, Neil.
I second the motion.
Okay, so I'm going to call the roll. All in favor say aye, any opposed say nay. Council Vice President Zesma.
Aye.
Okay, Council Member Spiegel.
Aye.
Council Member Wu.
Aye.
Council Member Harris.
Aye.
And Council Member Sales.
Aye.
Okay, carries unanimously. So we will have that executive session immediately upon adjournment of this work session. So now let's move on to our discussion topic, and I'm going to turn it over to John Schlichting, our Director of Planning and Code Administration, to lead us in the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The focus of tonight's work session is to review staff's recommendations on changes to the city's adequate public facilities ordinance, or APFO, to allow the city to begin charging developers of residential construction a fee which was originally established in 2015 to assist in funding school construction to alleviate overcrowded schools. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, I didn't, slide 7. Thank you, Chris. As you all know, Gaithersburg residents are actually served by 6 Montgomery County Public School high school districts. In addition to Gaithersburg and Quince Orchard, small sections of the city are served by Northwest, Wooten, Watkins Mill, and Magruder High School. Next slide. By way of background, our APFO was last amended in 2015, and that amendment included the establishment of a Gaithersburg Montgomery County Schools Facilities payment fee. This fee could be charged to residential developers building units in areas where a school or schools exceeded 105% capacity at 5 years from approvals. The city had the legal authority to charge this fee because it was based on a fee that the county was already charging, the Montgomery County Schools Facilities Payment Fee. Next slide, please. The fee had to be used to alleviate school overcrowding within 15 years. The ordinance included waiver provisions and regulations were drafted for its implementation. Shortly before we were about to put those regulations in place in the fall of 2016, Montgomery County eliminated their schools facilities payment fee, which removed the city's legal authority to charge a fee. Next slide, please. Fast forward to 2020, when Montgomery County once again updated their subdivision staging policy, which is now called the 2020-2024 Growth and Infrastructure Policy, or GIP. This update included the reinstatement of a similar fee to the one eliminated in 2016, which is now called Utilization Premium Payments. This new fee also reinstates our legal authority to charge our similar fee, which is why we were here before you tonight. I will now turn it over to Kirk Eby to tell you more about the county's GIP and the utilization premium payments. Next slide, please.
Thank you, John. So the biggest change that was associated with the GIP, the new growth infrastructure policy, is the elimination of the residential development moratorium from the county schools test. So during the development of the growth policy, county staff noted that most of the growth in school enrollment is being driven by turnover in existing housing and changes in demographics rather than by new residential development. And retaining the moratorium was seen as counterproductive because it constrains the supply of new housing, which has several potential impacts, namely reducing the number of new affordable housing units being constructed, and of course, delaying any additional revenue from real property taxes, since housing would be delayed as well. But because there was still a lot of concern about school overcrowding, there were other approaches incorporated into the growth policy to help increase school capacity. And those included establishing school impact areas, so the infill areas and the turnover areas, modifying the school impact tax rates, and as John mentioned, instituting the utilization premium payment, or UP fee, for areas that have overcrowded schools. Next slide, please. And since, of course, the work session is focused on the city establishing a similar fee to the county UP fee, I'm going to walk you through the way that fee works in the county. So the first step for the county UP fee is to determine whether a proposed residential development is located within an area that has overcrowded schools or not. And then overcrowding has been defined by the county using the two criteria you see on this slide. So the first criteria is the utilization rate standard, which is basically the enrollment over the capacity of the school. And the second criteria is the seat deficit standard, which is really just the number of the enrollment minus the capacity of the school. So the number of seats that are not available that need to be there. So the UP fee at the county is only charged if both of those criteria are met. So you have to be over the utilization rate standard, and you have to have the seat deficit standard in order to be charged the UP fee. And in addition to that, the county has established 3 tiers that correspond to the severity of overcrowding at a specific school level. So as the chart on the slide shows, the more severe the overcrowding, the higher a tier will be assigned to an individual school. And so again, to sum up the first step, the county first reviews each individual school in the system to determine whether an UP fee is required. And if it is required, then they determine which tier is applicable. Next slide. So this map shows the elementary schools that serve the city and which ones would actually meet the criteria for an UP fee and the associated tier for the UP fee. And staff notes that 6 of the 16 elementary schools that serve Gaithersburg do qualify for the UP fee. Next slide. So this map would show which middle schools in the city meet the criteria for an UP fee and an associated tier. But of course, staff notes there are no middle schools that actually have the UP fee. So instead, we're using this map to show the infill areas, which are the darker gray, and the turnover school impact areas, which are just the white areas, just so you can kind of get an idea of what areas of the city fall into each of those. And staff notes that the actual impact taxes that are paid are slightly lower in the infill impact area than in the turnover impact area. And because the up fees are related to that, that underlying impact tax rate, the up fees would also be slightly lower in the infill areas. Okay, next slide. And so this map shows which high schools in the city meet the criteria for an up fee and the associated tier. And staff notes that 3 of the 6 high schools that serve the city, basically half of them, do qualify for the up fee. Next slide. So the second step of the county up fee, after they determine if an up fee is applicable, and if so, which tier, is to calculate the actual fee, the actual up fee itself. So if a school does qualify for an up fee, that associated tier from the up test, or the first step, is used along with the school level to calculate what the actual fee would be. And this chart on here kind of shows you what that fee would be generally. So the up fee is based on a percentage of the school impact tax that is also due. And if a proposed residential development has multiple overcrowded schools that qualify for the up fee, then there would be multiple up fees charged, one at each school level. And this will hopefully make more sense on the next slide. But before we get there, I just want you to note that the percentage used for a tier 2 elementary school, the payment factor is 33.33% of the underlying impact tax. And then for a tier 1 middle school, the fee would be 10% of the underlying tax. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And so this is an example of how an up fee would work, or how it would be actually calculated for a hypothetical 100-unit townhouse development that was located within an infill impact area. So the first thing the county schools test would do is to determine whether an up fee was applicable, and if so, which tier. So you can see in the top of the slide, that was determined to be a tier 2 up fee for elementary school level, a tier 1 up fee for the middle school level, and then no up fee for the high school. And then next, the current school impact tax rate sheet is consulted, and this is at the actual rate sheet that's in effect right now. And if you look at the one that's highlighted in red, so we said this was going to be an infill impact area, and we said it was going to be a townhouse, which is a single family attached, and you'll see that the corresponding impact tax fee is $18,053, or $18,053, sorry. And then using the table from the previous slide, and again, we noted what the rates would be for the up fee, you'll see that the elementary school up fee is 33.33% of that total impact tax, or $6,017.67 cents per unit. And then for the middle school fee, it's 10% of that impact tax, or $1,805.30 per unit. And so the total up fee for each townhouse would be $7,822.97. And then at the building permit, when they apply for a building permit, both the impact tax and the up fee would be collected. So a total of $25,875.97. And I think that's all for me. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rob, and he's going to talk about the actual implementation of an up fee for the city. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Thanks, Kirk, and good evening, Mayor and members of the council. So this first slide is really to talk about the purpose for this evening. And once again, it's really the revisions that were in your packet are to reflect implementing the fee based upon current state law. And this was sort of laid out in Deputy City Attorney Johnson's memo to the council that's in the packet. Why Kirk went through all of those detailed things is we have to adopt those standards in order to implement our fee. In 2015, the fee was a flat rate for everyone, so it was a lot simpler. So now what you're going to see in the ordinance is adopting the up tier payment percentages. Another change is, obviously changing the references to the up specifically rather than the school facilities fee. We are proposing changing the city manager's adequacy determination from July 1st to the first business day in August. And really, this is in order to include the final adopted CIP numbers from the county. So it's just a logistical. Sometimes July 1st, when we do our announcements, the county really hasn't fleshed out all their final documentation. And eventually, should we go through the public hearing process, we will be establishing a new effective date for collection. Next slide, please. So a major aspect that was solely related to the fee in 2015 was a discussion of potential waivers from the fee and or the test. And on the screen right now is what's currently on the books. And this was passed by council in 2015 and very much reflects council's priorities of 2015. And these included that the property is identified in the annual strategic plan as a priority area. The second one, it really is very important. It is a non-rental residential development that proposes 30% or greater of total fee simple dwelling units to be sold as affordable housing with a minimum of 15% MPDU, 15% workforce, and is in a census tract in which the median value of owner-occupied housing is above 50% of the median value of owner-occupied housing for the city. This very much reflected the city's policy at that point of trying to expand affordable housing throughout the city from an ownership perspective, not a rental, but an ownership. And in particular, when this was done, this was really in many ways related to the Kentlands area and the elementary school over there before the Dufif change. Lastly, the last waiver is a development that provides either land at no cost for, or funding or construction of a public civic use benefiting the city. So again, these are the three that are on the books now. Next slide, please. So we're proposing some changes and seeking some guidance as we move forward now that the world has somewhat changed since 2015. Staff ourselves is proposing one change, that in the last one, that it's construction of a public or a charter school and not a public or a civic use. As the council is well aware, we had a lot of discussion during the Lake Forest Mall master plan about what public civic uses could be and entail. And really, we feel now at this point, granting of land for a city park really shouldn't necessarily absolve a development from school facilities fees. So we'd really like to tie the nexus more directly to education, and that's why we said public or charter. From a policy standpoint, I guess the first question we have is, does the council wish to retain the affordable housing discretionary waiver and retain its applicability for non-rental? Staff is of the opinion this may be worth retaining. We can understand this. And I think an important thing to note that I didn't mention on the last slide, with all of this, the way the code was written, it is solely at the discretion of council. Essentially, to even be considered for a waiver, you have to meet one of these standards, but in no way does it by right grant you the ability to be waived from the fee. So again, it's contextual. The council does have discretion, but from this standpoint, again, I don't think, while maybe it's different than 2015, I think we still have an interest in expanding our fee simple affordable housing throughout this city. For the second one, this is sort of the county as part of their GIP. They exempt moderately MPDUs outright from both the impact tax and their up fee. Our question, really is, do we wish to follow the same? Staff is recommending no, that at a minimum, you keep it as discretionary. And part of that focus is going back to the visioning data analysis. We know a lot of our pipeline is going to be multifamily, and probably a large percentage of that is rental. So that means 15% of all of that's coming in the future. We don't think it's prudent to automatically exempt them potentially from school impacts. They're already not going to pay the county impact tax. So this is a way to help collect and offset potentially, any mitigating factors, should it meet the tiering and the seat deficit. So again, staff, doesn't support following the county model as it relates to the city fee. But if council wanted to do something, we would recommend making it discretionary. So once again, it's not by right that you're exempt or by right that you don't get a break. A big question, again, the county in their redoing exempts opportunity zones and enterprise zones from the impact taxes. Our question is, do we wish to either exempt outright or discretionarily units in opportunity zones and enterprise zones? And this is going to be really applicable to Lake Forest Mall. So Lake Forest Mall will not be paying any transportation or housing impact taxes because it, in fact, is in both. But we know we've approved up to 1,600 units. Staff is recommending that we implement the fee, even if we can't implement impact taxes, but 1,600 units is 1,600 units. So we feel that, it should be discretionary, let council decide, but let's not absolve them right off the bat. And lastly, does council wish to retain the annual strategic planning discretionary waiver? Staff doesn't have any heartburn with this, but we think potentially any ordinance that comes back for a public hearing should be partially amended to also identify any potential other vehicle that the council may use to establish policy. We've seen over the years, the annual plan has grown and changed. So to tie it to one model and retain that's been in place since 2015 may be a little bit short-sighted. So we'd like to provide some additional wiggle room. So this really is the gist of the ordinance itself. And before I move on to the regulations, I'm happy to answer any questions or open up to some discussion if we need to further flesh out sort of what the issues are with this.
All right, thanks, Rob. So let me start with I guess maybe this is a question for Lynn, but legally, if someone's developing residential in an enterprise zone and therefore not subject to impact taxes from the county, are we legally able to charge this fee, given that the county's not charging the fee at the time?
Yeah, the state statute obviously requires the county to have a fee in place before we can charge our fee. But because at least it's my understanding, and Frank's probably more familiar with this than I am, but it's my understanding that since the county exempts the fee, it at least recognizes that a fee could be charged. So I believe that we could charge the fee.
Frank, you agree with that?
I would say it would require coordination with the county, because if the county's point of view is that they would not charge the fee at all, we would have a difficult time doing it, because the limits of state law do require the county fee to be in place and chargeable. But as Lynn said, if the county does view this as an exemption where otherwise the fee would be charged, in coordination with the county, it is a possibility. Again, it would require clarification, but that's part of, we would have to, in establishing this, basically establish a working MOU with the county as well as the school board.
Okay. Well, I do agree with the staff recommendations here on all four questions. I would hope that in a case like if someone were able to, if the circumstances and planets were to align such that Lake Forest could redevelop tomorrow or could present a plan tomorrow, we know that there's going to be an impact on the schools. South Lake Elementary in particular is overcrowded, and I'm not even sure at the high school level what the Watkins Mill situation is at the moment, but I would want there to be some vehicle for us to collect this fee so that the impact of the new students at Lake Forest could, those units could contribute to new facilities. But in any event, I guess we'll sort of have to determine and maybe get an MOU with the county or with MCPS on that to make it legally solid. In any event, I do agree with all of the suggestions, the staff positions on those questions. Who'd like to go next? Ryan, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks to all the staff who have been working on this. And needless to say, I'm very happy that we are having this session since I was actually one of the initial proponents of developing a city facilities payment fee program back in, I guess, 2015. But I do want to back up for just a minute to kind of explain for the benefit of the public why we're even here in the first place and why we initially created the first fee that kind of went dormant. So just for a moment, before I ask a couple of questions, if I may, I just wanted to explain that. So many of you know, for years and years, we've been working to come up with ways to try to sort of incentivize and encourage MCPS and Montgomery County to pay more attention and direct more resources to the needs of our Gaithersburg students, especially the significant overcrowding that the mayor mentioned and that many of us know well. But of course, we're competing with lots of other communities all over a very large county. But when I learned that there was such a thing as a county facilities payment fee, and that it did not already apply to development inside our city, even though developers have already sort of baked that fee into their costs of doing business in the county, I brought this idea to city council and staff, and we developed a creative way to get hopefully some better leverage in this long-running debate over how to get MCPS to prioritize Gaithersburg's needs, given that municipal government doesn't oversee and control the school system or the capital budget for the construction of schools, or the decisions surrounding the building and upkeep of schools. So we developed this facilities fee program to kind of mirror what the county was already doing in other places, as a potentially powerful tool to persuade MCPS to focus on our local community priorities for school infrastructure. The idea was that we could collect a pool of funds through this fee that would have applied to development had it been anywhere else in the county anyway, but which was not already being applied in Gaithersburg. And then we could dangle those funds, so to speak, in front of MCPS on the condition that the school system use that money to address overcrowding in our local Gaithersburg schools. And I think it was a pretty good idea, if I do say so myself. Unfortunately, the county sort of, I don't think intentionally, but nevertheless, they pulled the rug out from under us when they eliminated the county fee in 2016, right before our fee was about to go into effect. And since we can only charge a fee if it is comparable to one imposed by the county, as our city attorney has explained, our fee program was essentially rendered dead on arrival at that point. But now that the county has rolled out this new similar fee, which they are calling the utilization premium payment, or the UP, we can resurrect our program, which basically simply matches the county's fee and applies it inside the city, and hopefully once again allow us to build up some leverage with MCPS to prioritize Gaithersburg school needs. So with that said, I do have a few questions. I think it's appropriate for us to be revisiting some of the specific waiver and exemption aspects that we talked about back in 2015. But I'm wondering if staff could talk a little bit more about why we chose to have our exemptions apply to non-rental properties only back in 2015, and sort of what's the impetus for suggesting that we might want to continue to do that now. Why did we come up with that as a distinguishing factor between rental properties and ownership properties? Was it simply to encourage developers to somehow build more ownership units, or I'm just trying to remember what was our logic.
You're correct, Councilmember Spiegel. Again, as I sort of mentioned, a lot of the focus and discussion at that time, we were seeing a lot of solely rental development coming in. And at that point, our housing policy was still advocating for the growth of fee simple ownership opportunities in the city. The discussion with council at that time, when we were going through this, was really that, they already had to do 7.5. They had to do the 15% for fee simple. But I think a lot of the discussion, and I think it may have been yourself and Councilmember Sesma, who are really going, in order to get out from underneath something, you have to make a sizable chunk. And that's why essentially the council decided to establish the 15% on both workforce and MPDUs to make this, because the other concern of council was, because sometimes almost the workforce housing is the same price point as the regular market rate. Right. So you didn't want to present an opportunity where a developer could hit the 30% just by building additional workforce housing. And again, the census tract discussion was, there was a lot of discussion, and this was re-raised during our visioning data analysis. A lot of the opportunities are on the east side, but we know from the demographics, whether it be geared towards our program or just from the market, more affordability is on the east side of town than the west. And as I said, in 2015, a major focal discussion was Rachel Carson at that point. But there was also, you know, if you want to bring stuff in, you know, can we get more affordable housing on the west side of town? And we knew not necessarily, you know, the rental is the rental, but this is, you know, obviously advocating for ownership is longstanding at that point. So hopefully that sort of frames, you know, where the discussions were in 2015. It was one, to try to get, you know, more affordable housing in a fee simple product, advocate for home ownership. Two, trying to potentially set this up for introducing more affordable housing on the west side of town. And three, making sure it wasn't all geared towards workforce housing. But you know, you didn't want the council, I shouldn't say you didn't want, the council's direction was, you know, 30% was a good litmus test. Because I think at that point, even the county was beginning to ponder their 25% affordable housing as it related to impact taxes.
Okay, that's helpful. And Mayor, if I may, I had one other follow-up question. And that is about this idea of a sort of blanket authority by the mayor and council to impose a discretionary waiver. I guess if we were to have that, then essentially, I mean, the mayor and council could treat each project differently regardless. And I guess I have some concerns about, you know, potential fairness and due process issues if our discretionary authority is essentially boundless with no factors that we need to consider or no, you know, particular directives, whereas, you know, some of these discretionary waivers are specifically tied to certain characteristics of a development. If the discretionary waiver is just kind of, we can do whatever we want, I think I have a little heartburn about that idea. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
That was a holdover from 2015, but before, you know, should we get direction to move forward with a public hearing, I'd be happy to explore this with the city attorney's office about maybe some additional findings that have to be made as opposed to just these land use contexts.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Who'd like to go next? Otherwise, I'll have Rob continue with the presentation. Mike Sesma, please.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for the presentation so far. Lots of stuff that we've been talking about for a long time, and interesting that we have the opportunity now to reintroduce this fee. So I guess I just want to make it clear for the public is that no current pending applications would be subject to this fee. Is that correct for development?
Yes, because we have not established an effective date.
Okay, so only applications submitted after this is passed would be subject to this fee. Okay.
Whatever we establish the effective date to be.
Right, right. Because I think, yeah, there are actually people probably very interested in that question of when this would be imposed. So, I mean, I'm in general agreement with the recommendations from staff. I think Ryan's request for a little bit more study on our discretionary waiver makes good sense. I think the fact that we can do this now and the fact that MCPS finally changed their whole utilization and policy in terms of capacity for schools and how that would determine whether a new school was needed from a shared capacity across a cluster to a capacity based on actual individual schools makes so much more sense here. And so it makes sense also then that they would develop this up so that there would be funds available to do this, because not only is it difficult to have the funds to build a facility, it's also very difficult to find a location to build those facilities. So within, you know, certainly in Montgomery County, it's going to be very difficult to, there's a real challenge in funding based just on acquisition of property needed to build a facility. So and then the additional cost of building and constructing and fitting out the school. So anyway, that's where I am. So thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Any other comments or questions before we move forward? Neil, please.
So the map that we saw, or the maps that we saw showing the elementary school and middle schools that fall into these various categories, those maps are based on utilization today, or are they based on utilization based on the planned projects in the CIP, like the Gaithersburg Elementary School #8, the Crown Farm High School, and the DeFeef expansion?
So those are based on just looking at the criteria alone. So at the county level, they do allow some kind of credit for projects that are currently under construction. So if you were to look at the county, what they've published for their schools tests and their up fees that are for the areas outside the city of Gaithersburg, you would note that for example, the Summit Hall Elementary School does not have an up fee, and that is because the new elementary school is under construction. We did not do that. Staff did not do that when we made the map, because again, that's something that the council would have to decide whether they wanted to follow what Montgomery County is doing, or just sort of go with the straight criteria with the idea that, well, just because it's in the budget or under construction, it doesn't mean it's going to be completed when they say it's going to be completed. It doesn't mean it's going to be completed at all. Even probably it will be completed, of course, but just because there's still some uncertainty, you may still want to charge the fee, even though the county's not. So,
And I think this will be more explained when I go into the next session about the regulations. Again, the purpose for the maps with this was really help to try to give a visual graphic on, as of today, if we followed what's as the ordinance is written, what would be where. We weren't doing a deep dive as if, what we would do on the, have ready for the first business day of August.
Okay, the reason I brought that up is I think the situation has changed somewhat since 2015, when we previously had this discussion, in that despite the fact that we haven't been able to collect money to supplement the construction of new schools, we actually have convinced MCPS to go forward with several projects that I just named. So the question that I have is, what do we need more of? Do we need more housing, or do we need more school capacity? And I think 6 years ago, the answer was very clearly that we needed more school capacity, but I think that the scales may have tipped the other direction at this point, that school capacity might be in better shape, at least projected to be in better shape than has been in the past, and significantly reduced overcrowding. But we want to see housing constructed. So increasing the cost to people building houses may not be the optimal approach at this point. So I don't have a firm answer in my own mind, and I'm sure my colleagues are still grappling with this, but I think that's something that we need to consider, whether, as the government likes to say, whether this has been overtaken by events and situation has changed, or whether this still makes sense. Because the way to get more affordable housing is not to make housing more expensive, right? So hopefully we can consider both sides of that. I think those are two critical issues facing the city going forward.
Thanks, Neil. We'll go to Mike.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that our capacity problem was not related to overdevelopment or new development. It was related to the fact that we had basic growth and enrollment, regardless of in spite of the fact that we weren't building a lot of new homes. It's a growth pattern in the county that's been going on for 30 years. And so even within Gaithersburg or in the adjacent regions in the county, there wasn't a lot of new residential development, yet schools were growing, school enrollments were growing despite that. So we still need the schools and we still need the growth, but with the growth, you're going to still need additional capacity. And I think that's why we need to do this. So that I'm just trying to address the issues that Neil raised. So yeah, we still need a lot of housing, but we're also going to need the facilities to accommodate those families that are going to move into those houses.
Thanks, Mike. I think Neil wants to respond. Go ahead, Neil.
Just as a counterpoint to that, because I think Mike made a great point, but also thinking that the reason that these types of fees were implemented to begin with was the expectation that school capacity was driven by new homes, and the owners and developers of new homes should be paying for the increased school capacity. If it's not being driven by the growth of new housing development, why should the developers and ultimately the purchasers of those homes pay for the new school capacity? Also, interestingly, and I mean, we've had this discussion before, and I certainly have crunched the numbers to, related to Rachel Carson, but Rachel Carson's school enrollment has actually been dropping in recent years. So even though we saw it happening, growing and growing and growing, without development is shrinking. So I still have to wrap my head around what is really going on here. So to be continued.
Thank you, Neil. Anyone else before we go back to the presentation? Not seeing anyone else. Rob Robinson, go right ahead.
Thank you. Chris, if we could pick it up on packet page 21. So moving on, the ordinance also calls for the development of regulations, and our proposed city regulations and a draft was also included in your packet. It's really composed of the 6 sections that you see on the screen right now. Next slide. So the first one is the intent, and this sort of brings up, sort of aligns with the ordinance. That it's on new residential developments with the exception of age restricted, just as our APFO is set up. And it's really to ensure adequacy of public school capacity. Next slide, please. So applicability, this again sort of reaffirms the ordinance requirements, the 5-year, that it meets, the standards, those up standards that we talked about, the percentage over and the seat deficits. So again, this is just reaffirming what was in the ordinance. Next slide, please. The third section is definitions. This just helps clarify certain terms and phrases used in the regulations like age-restricted development, reaffirming once again that it's establishing, 55 and over, that it aligns with the Fair Housing Act. Dwelling unit, again, affirming that it's living facilities for not more than one family, and residential development. So it affirms once again that this is talking about a development that includes at least one dwelling unit. So these are all pretty much cut and dry. Next slide, please. Moving into the meat of the regulations. The fourth section talks really about the procedures, and the front half, as shown on this slide, sort of lays out the overview. So the fee itself, aligning with whatever the county charges, we're going to be establishing in our fee schedule each year through the council, through the fee schedule. On the first day of August, we had talked about changing from July 1st to the first day of business day of August. 3 things are going to occur. We're going to be identifying the schools projected to exceed 150% of programming capacity 5 years in the future, where our moratorium is. And please remember, when we had discussions, in 2015, council established the 150%, where the county retained itself at 120. The second action that's going to occur is we will be identifying those schools that exceed both the utilization and the seat deficit. And then lastly, we'll be identifying what tier the fee will be assessed per the applicable school year. So again, the first business day of August, where it used to be we just identified those schools in moratorium, now we'll be identifying potentially if there's schools over 150%, but again, what tiers and what schools meet these standards that will be charged the city fee. Next slide, please. So the second portion of section 4 really talks about how we're going to implement this through the site development process. And what we are envisioning now is that what comes out that year, we will be reviewing and establishing, the tier rates, just the rates, is it a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, as schematic development plan or preliminary site plan. This is essentially preliminary subdivision. So again, we'll have a unit count, and essentially based upon preliminary subdivision, we'll know the type of units that are coming in. The calculation, the actual application of how much we're going to charge based upon that tiering is going to happen at final site plan. And the reason we're doing that is sometimes, as council is aware, especially in multifamily projects, the overall unit count can drop from schematic development plan or preliminary site plan to final site plan. So while we know at preliminary subdivision, we'll say hypothetically, everything's a tier 1 elementary school. We're not going to actually charge that fee yet till it comes in for final site plan, because then we'll truly have the final unit count. Of note, we feel it's important to establish the tier rates at preliminary subdivisions, SDP or preliminary site plan, because as council may remember, from the county perspective, once that gets approval, they bake those numbers into their school projections. So essentially, every proposed student that could come out of this development is sort of established at this preliminary subdivision stage. And MCPS and Montgomery Planning uses that moving forward, so they assume those. So we actually collect the fee at building permit, and this aligns with what the county does. In 2015, we had discussions and we talked about collecting it at any site development permits. But as we've seen, there can be a great lag. Especially when we start the clock and for accounting procedures, which I'll get to in a minute, makes more sense to collect this at actual building permit. So again, it's going to be a 3-step process. Preliminary subdivision, we identify, hey, you're going to have to pay this tier's fee. At final site plan, we're going to go, this is the amount, the actual financial amount you're going to have to pay, and we make that a condition of your approval. Then you come in when you're ready for building permit, you actually pay that fee. Next slide, please. Which means, where does that money go? So the next section is administration, and working with Kim Francisco was very helpful. What we're talking about doing is a dedicated account. It's not going to be considered revenue. And something of importance is that the interest earned is going to remain in the account. So next slide, please. So following up with that, how to use this account. A holdover from 2015's discussion was council at that point, and we've retained this, said the money may only be used, in a sense, transferred for a project that's in the second year of construction that increases student capacity. Now, the important thing to note is that is when the money can be transferred. And a lot of this discussion was, as Councilmember Sesma discussed, council at that time, and it sort of goes to the second bullet, didn't want to forward fund projects that may get mothballed or stall. So council's discussion in 2015 was, if it's in the second year of the construction CIP, it is moving forward. You're not going to build 2 years worth of a building, then stop. Council's direction back then that we've retained is that during this time, council didn't want this money going to portables or, again, project planning and design. The discretion, council wanted stuff going towards construction. What we've talked about, and this is going to have to be in the MOU, but it sort of aligns with the discussions we had with Montgomery County going back to 2016, that they submit their request no later than November 1st of each calendar year, requesting the city to transfer monies from the fee account. Now, one thing to bring up is, don't think of these bullets as linear. If MCPS knows they're going to have a project, they can make the request at any point by November 1st to the city for the transfer of funds, with the understanding that the funds won't actually get transferred till the second year of construction. So even at the end of project planning, as they begin to work out their budgets or whatever, they can go, hey, school A, we know we're going to do an expansion. Gaithersburg, we want to put in the requests now. So, this doesn't mean that MCPS or Montgomery County have to wait to make the request until the second year. It's just the monies won't be transferred till the second year. And again, the disbursements themselves will be identified each fiscal year as part of the city's budget process. So going into it, by getting it November 1st, council and the city for open and transparency can identify, hey, we're going to be transferring X amount of dollars to school B. We'll be transferring X amount of dollars this year to school C, et cetera. Next slide, please. So what happens if the monies don't get spent? Well, as Frank said in his memo, and with state law, at a certain point, if you don't use the monies, you have to return it. We are proposing, if it's not expended within 8 years from the date of collection, it must be returned to the current property owners of the dwelling unit whose address, condominium, or unit or recorded lot was used in the calculation of the fee amount. This is another reason to collect it at building permit. For tracking purposes through EnerGov, whatever, we'll have much better reporting abilities for what addresses the monies were collected from. Review of the unexpended fees will be conducted annually on July 1st and will be dispersed by December 1st of the same year. But important to note, even over those 8 years, the interest earned remains in the account. Next slide, please. Heading into the last section again is a review of the waiver provisions that we sort of talked about. So it cross-references again, the preliminary approval. A lot of the discussions that we had will be earlier related to the ordinance will be going carried forth into the regulations. But this does have two additional sections. The rescission provisions for both the applicant and the city. And essentially what that means is council grants a waiver because developer is going to do X. By the time, and that's done as a condition, then it turns out they don't do X. What do we get to do? This establishes both from the applicant side, if they wish to decide, hey, we no longer want the waiver, we'll go ahead and pay the fee, the process for that. Or if the city finds that a developer hasn't abided by the conditions, what our actions are. The linchpin we also have is with the building permit. So again, we can craft the conditions that whatever actions are needed to convey the waiver must be, recorded as covenants or whatever prior to the issuance of building permits. So this gives us also the leg up that if they try to get out, they're not going to get their building permit. They're not going to be able to build their homes. The last part is the change of plan and validating the basis for the waiver prior to final site plan. So again, it's similar to the rescission, but a little bit different. This is, again, if, we get preliminary plan approval, and then they come in and go, we're going to change the plan. Market conditions have changed. Or somebody that we were guaranteed to have as a builder, has stepped out. So again, the council may revoke by resolution the granted waiver because of the changes in this final site plan. And then again, if the waiver is revoked, the subject project's fees, rates, schools, and final calculations will all be established at final site plan. I know it was a lot. Regulations are very dry. So next slide, please. Last slide, Chris. So really with next steps, what we were looking for this evening, I think we've got it. A lot of the discussion, the exemptions, waivers, guidance from council, what to do there. Are there really any other desired edits? We've thrown a lot at you. We're hoping to get direction to move forward with scheduling a joint public hearing. And as part of this process continuing on, as been mentioned, we're going to have to complete an MOU with county finance on the regulations themselves, just to make sure everybody's on board. That may occur prior to the public hearing, or the MOU may actually be executed, following, if we move forward through a public hearing, following the adoption of these two items. And with that, staff is available to answer any questions. And I'd like to mention Kim and Frank are here. So if you have questions related to their help, I'm going to lean on them. I'm not afraid.
All right. Good to know. Okay. I see Neil's hand first. Let's go to Neil.
All right, so I have two questions. I'm going to ask one that's a little bit more technical first, and then ask the other one, which is more policy. So 8 years goes by and we decide to refund the money. It goes to the current property owner. So in other words, I buy a house from a developer who's paid a fee. Presumably that's baked into the price I pay for the house. 3 years later, I sell the house to somebody else. Somewhere down the road, somebody gets a check. That's correct. Is that taxable income? Is it reduce the basis of the price of their house? Is there some thought given to the fact that they're not expecting it and they suddenly get a several $1,000 check back? What are they supposed to do with it? Do we know the answer to that?
Kim may be able to provide some insight from the tax side. I'm not quite sure. Again, the reason we're doing this, Councilmember Harris, is as we've seen, oftentimes developers form LLCs. 8 years later, they may no longer exist. So trying to track down previous owners or the original developers may prove difficult. So oftentimes in other situations where there is, sending it back, my gut tells me this would be taxable income.
Yeah, I have no problem with the money going back to the current homeowner for all the reasons you said, and also the fact that it's baked into the cost of the house originally, so it should be part of the equity. But how it's handled from a tax point of view, I think, is not clear. Kim might have.
Councilmember Harris, we would need to research that a little bit just to make sure that we're clear on what those tax implications would be for any homeowner who would obtain a payment like that.
All right, that's not a surprise to hear. Okay, on the other side, when MCPS comes to us and asks us for money to help fund the expansion or construction of a school, how do we handle it if the school, which most of them aren't 100% populated by Gaithersburg residents? Do we allocate it on a proportional basis? What's the thinking behind that?
Part of the challenge, and this goes back to our discussions going all the way back to 2014, 2015, is there is no school in Gaithersburg that solely just serves Gaithersburg residents. This was part of the arguments going back. Part of the discussion going all the way back, why we went to 150 was prior to that, we were more restrictive than the county, and things were still getting, development was still being approved when we were precluding development on our own. So I think in a very black and white sense, capacity is capacity, whether it's being driven by county or city growth. If our goal is to help fund CIP projects that reduce overall capacity, I think it'd be difficult to go, well, proportional share. They will make the request. We will know how much money we collected for that specific school, and that is the pool. And it's up to council to decide, do they want to do a portion or all upon the request.
Thanks, Neil. Any other questions or comments? Rob Wu.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, staff, for this presentation. It's an intricate topic. It's a difficult topic, and at the very least, I think, based on the county's recent actions, it's a discussion worth having moving forward. And I appreciate the framework laid out, and so I would support moving forward with a joint session so that we can further discuss this on the record.
Thank you, Rob. Any other questions or comments before I go to the public? Okay. All right. So there are a couple of members of the public I see on this Zoom. If anybody would like to weigh in on this topic, just use the Zoom raise hand function. Okay, I see one hand. Tech team, if you could bring up Stephen Escobar, please. And Stephen, we ask that you keep your comments no more than 3 minutes, state your name and address or neighborhood for the record. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council, staff, and all others in attendance. My name's Stephen Escobar from 1 Ramsdale Court. Most of what I was going to say was already taken by Council Member Ryan Spiegel's words, so I'll just say ditto to those. I did want to add some personal things. As a graduate from Resnick Elementary School, Redland Middle School, and Magruder High School on the east side of Gaithersburg, I understand the crowding in these schools. Also, as a realtor in this area, there's a saying about home builders, and that is when the housing market is cold, they're serving shrimp, and when it's hot, they're serving cold cuts. This city fee is not going to stop a developer from taking advantage of the huge profits from the current housing shortage nationwide. So I would be in favor of a city fee imposed on to help subsidize the cost of MCPS schools. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Stephen. Tech team, if you could bring up David Bellegarde, please. David, you know the drill. Just state your name and address or neighborhood and go right ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Dave Bellegarde, Washingtonian Woods. Obviously, it's very important to fund our schools, and imposing a fee to do so is the logical thing for a government entity to do. I do want to ask the council to carefully think about the discussion to impose the fee or to be able to impose the fee on areas within the opportunity zone and other lower cost developments such as MPDUs. This is a flat fee. Flat fees by their nature are regressive. A $100,000 unit will receive the same fee that $1 million unit will. So I think it's very important to ensure that we are protecting the reason that we have set asides like MPDUs and opportunity zones and such. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. And I see no more speakers from the public. So Lori Ann Sales, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just had a quick question, because I know that when we've collected this fee in the past, it went into our housing initiative fund. And so now it's just going to go into a general fund and collect interest, or are we putting it into the housing initiative fund if these fees are collected at some point?
Kim will be able to join me on this. We've never collected the fee, first of all. Again, we lost the legal authority in 2016. So again, from finances perspective, because we want to keep the money separate, we don't recommend necessarily putting it in the general fund or a housing initiatives fund, because of housing initiative funds don't get reimbursed after a certain period of time. So from accounting standpoints and the technical, now this is where Kim was very helpful, because we were going, hey, let's do it like Forest Con Fund. And she goes, no, Rob, no, crazy man. Let's do it in a dedicated account. And I think if you could just take a minute just to help explain the difference, what this dedicated account would do.
So we would, put together a separate bank account where we would make sure that these funds are segregated from the other assets of the city, and we would be able to manage those investment earnings separately. But we would hold the funds in a liability account, and that account would more than likely sit in the general fund, but they would not be revenues of the general fund. So the money would sit in a liability account because they're really not ours. We're really passing those along to someone else. So we don't want to recognize those as revenue of the city. We're really just passing those along to the county, to MCPS, when the appropriate time comes. But dedicating the separate account, it would be a separate account in our ledger, and it would be a separate bank account where we would hold those financial assets.
Okay, so how are we funding our housing initiative fund in the past? Because I thought we were funding that through impact fees. Is that not the case?
If Tom Lonergan's still here, he may be able to answer that question, because again, impact taxes is a county, so they collect that directly. We don't collect or use the impact taxes.
Yeah, we should move Tom over, because I don't have that from budget last my first season committed to memory, but I believe there's a fee that developers pay in lieu of affordable housing.
Yeah.
Well, let me.
Okay.
That happened in one case with Crown.
Yeah.
And the reason it was able to happen with Crown is because Crown was annexed into the city before the city had our affordable housing ordinance, and it was annexed under the county's, the auspices of the county's affordable housing ordinance, and that has a buyout. And in the case, in the one building where there was going to be high condo fees, Crown took advantage of the payment in lieu of from the county ordinance, and we put it into our housing initiative fund. Tom, am I correct here?
You're correct. You pretty much summed it up. That Crown was an exception to our rule because of the annexation.
Okay, so it's just a one-off. Okay, now.
Yeah, because we actually don't have a mechanism in our affordable housing ordinance for people to buy out of it.
Okay. All right, that was my question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else, any other questions or comments? Otherwise, John, Kirk, Rob, do you feel guided?
Yes, if I could just quickly walk through just to make sure we're all on the same page. Council supports the staff recommended changes to potential waivers. However, before we come back for a public hearing, we're to research, do we have the ability as it relates to opportunity zones and potentially MPDUs? We're to review the tax implications of returning the fees. And I believe there was one more. Oh, we are to explore additional findings so we don't come across as arbitrary and capricious for council on the sole discretion of the granting of waivers. I believe that was everything. And what I'm hearing is, we'll begin putting this together and try to get on the agenda as soon as possible.
Sounds good. Unless anybody has any corrections here, and I'm not seeing any. Well then, Neil Harris, please.
Sorry, had to click that button. Just one tiny nit. It's just been bothering me a little tiny bit, which is if we refund somebody's fee, why would we not give them the interest that it earned on top of it? How is that? How is it fair to not do that? I think whether or not we answer that now, I think it's a
Yeah.
Well,
topic.
I mean, just an initial response to that, would be that it is not completely free to the city and the staff and the resources and administration of this entire program, and even the returning of the money itself is an endeavor that finance is excited about in the future. So I mean, I don't see us earning, we're not talking about millions of dollars of interest here, but I certainly don't think that we're cost free.
And could we set it up so that the mayor gets to personally hand out the checks if it's refunded?
What are you, my agent?
Only if they're not a tax burden, as you pointed out. I'm sure he doesn't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, I had nothing to do with the asking of that question, just so everybody knows. And with that, we have covered our discussion topic. As we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, we have an executive session immediately after this. And the next regular meeting of Mayor and Council is next Monday, September 20th. We hope to see you all there. Until next time, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.
Thank you.